Joining me now is Kellyanne Conway, former senior counselor to President Trump, Ben Domenech, editor-at-large of The Spectator, and Charlie Hurt, Washington Times opinion editor. All three are Fox News contributors. Kellyanne, let's start with you. Where did this narrative come from that the Democrats have all the momentum heading into 2024, given what I just laid out?
It came from the Democrats. It comes from the Democrats, including their enablers in the media. Look, it's supercilious spin and wishful thinking. They're stuck with this guy in large part because keeping him and Kamala Harris off the 2022 campaign trail helped the Democrats gain a seat in the Senate and narrowly lose the House. So in 2024, Laura, Biden and Harris cannot escape campaigning for Biden and Harris. They stuck her in California, him in Maryland, him at Union Station. Union Station, ladies and gentlemen, is not a swing state. It's not a swing congressional district. It is a train depot. And that's where they put the President of the United States to campaign. 2024 is different. Look, Biden's got problems other than the 66% of independents who don't want him to run, the 66% of seniors who say he's too old to run. I think his bigger problems, Laura, in this polling is his approval rating is down again. His approval rating on the economy is down again. And only 20% of Americans, according to the CNBC poll, believe that Joe Biden's policies on inflation are actually helping with inflation. In August or so, they passed this Inflation Reduction Act. You find me 10 Democrats in the Senate who voted for that Inflation Reduction Act who actively ran on voting for the Inflation Reduction Act. So, and look, Trump derangement syndrome is real. There is no vaccine. There's no booster. It's a real disease. And guess what? In 2024, the election's very simple. It's a referendum about Joe Biden, and he's going to own and eat all of his bad policies. All
right, Charlie, Senator Schumer thinks that he can pass this next spending bill with bipartisan support. Watch.
A year-long omnibus is the best and most balanced option to fund our government. And an omnibus is the most balanced approach because it would contain priorities both sides want to see. Funding for Ukraine. Let's now work together again to implement them fully.
Charlie, Mitch McConnell is giving Chuck Schumer just what he wants going into the next year. Republicans will have no leverage in the House to change pretty much anything up through October. But once again, the uniparty strikes.
Yeah, and it's absolutely appalling, especially at a moment like right now where Republicans should have the upper hand, especially on a fight like this. To demonstrate how they intend to govern differently, even if that means not giving the government or not giving Democrats what it is that they're seeking to do. And I think Kellyanne is exactly right. Voters understand this. Voters understand that the reason that they're paying so much more at the grocery store right now is because of Democrat policies that is causing inflation. One thing I have to say, though, about that I admire about what Democrats are doing is their ability, their desire to not talk about ideas because they're wrong on all the ideas, but their desire to pin every candidate to Donald Trump. And Republicans made a big mistake in this last election. They failed to pin every single candidate out there running to Joe Biden, because that is, in reality, is what all of those people were doing. They were all those Democrats were running to be a rubber stamp for Joe Biden. Joe Biden's popularity is low. It's going to be even lower when he has to go out there and defend himself. And I think that Republicans, I think that Republicans are going to have suited to have a tremendous victory in 2024. But they could have had a much bigger victory this time if they had succeeded at pinning every single one of those Democrats to Joe Biden and his hapless policies.
Well, Ben, of course, the Senate just voted to, pass this. And again, people watching this can't even believe this is happening, but they have this thing called a stopgap spending bill. I hate all this stuff. It funds the government until next Thursday or Friday, and then, of course, they're going to extend the federal cash, but then the omnibus will be voted on, and they're going to push this through at some point before the end of the year. Is this any way to run a government? And all these Republicans agreeing to this because they want never-ending funding for Ukraine? They're supposedly winning the war until they're not.
Well, I don't think it's just about that, Laura. I think it's also just an indictment of the fact that we have had this situation in Washington now for quite a long time. This is not a new occurrence, and yet we continually just accept this reality of these massive spending bills that no one has time to read, that they're asked to vote on immediately.
But why?
That contain all sorts of things that are...
Why? Why are we doing it?
Frankly, we have a dysfunctional leadership. We have a dysfunctional and anti-conservative leadership within the Republican Party that does not stand on any kind of fiscal principle. They are not willing to do what it takes or to take any kind of slings and arrows from a completely biased media that is entirely in hock for the Democratic Party. They won't stand up for what they actually believe in. And America should be fed up with this, especially when it comes from this octogenarian leadership class of the Democratic Party and the Republican Party that is spending on things that they will not be around to pay the bills for, that they are not going to be around to even see, and that your children and children's children are going to be paying for it without end into the future, in a diminished future for the American people. And frankly, this should be offensive to all people on both sides, because it's not a way to run a government and it's not a way to fund a country.
Yeah, an 88-year-old Senator Shelby from Alabama is the lead, quote, negotiator for the Republicans. He's retiring. He's like, I'm out of town after this. All right, Kellyanne, we mentioned Gavin Newsom as the other than Biden option for the Democrats in 2024. Well, Politico reporter today, just a White House correspondent, tweeted out that Newsom is planning for a January 6th, back to January 6th, inaugural address in Sacramento, and it's going to be a large march to the state capitol, then a speech focused on defending democracy. Kellyanne, they're all reading from the same hymnal here.
Right. No, they do. It's so silly because what is he doing about the homeless, about the drug crisis, about his backward economic state in California? You know what, Laura? Newsflash to Gavin Newsom. The rest of the country doesn't want to be California. It's a beautiful state. We all love visiting it. What is his argument for exporting that to the rest of the country? And by the way, the only reason people talk about Gavin Newsom now as an heir to Joe Biden is, number one, the 20-some people who ran against Joe Biden in 2020 for some reason are afraid to run against him again. Where's Sanders? Where's Warren? Where's Buttigieg? Why doesn't Kamala run against him? She did last time, basically called him a racist on the debate stage. And the second reason they talk about Newsom is because the real hero of the left, the love gov, Andrew Cuomo, was disgraced out of office. And that's the only reason they talk about Newsom. But it shows you how thin their bench is. Our bench is filled. We had so many Republican governors reelected this time with overwhelming margins. Yes, in Florida, but also in South Carolina, in Georgia, in Texas, in Iowa, in Tennessee. They are leading the way as chief executives, and those are the kind of policies people are going to be looking for. And look, we're going to keep seeing all this Trump versus Biden stuff, and people are going to ask for a third party. But I think the whole election needs to be about Joe Biden eating and owning his bad policies.
Yeah, speaking of Kellyanne's point, Charlie, a lot of people think, because the Democrats did better than expected in the Senate in 2022, that portends the same trend for 2024. Why is 2024 different? Obviously, there's a presidential election, but the basement campaign for Biden, especially up against strong policies on the other side in a track record with Trump's agenda, how can he possibly survive that?
Well, I think the most important point is the point you just made, which is the fact that he can't hide from this election. He has to engage in some way, even if it's just from his basement over TV, whatever. It's going to be far more about Joe Biden. Joe Biden is unpopular. But there are other reasons that I think that the dynamic is going to be very different. One is, as you point out, the Senate map is very different. It's far more favorable to Republicans. I think you've got something like 9 Democrats having to defend seats in competitive or Republican states. But the last thing is that, the reason that Republicans didn't do as well as we thought or the reason Republicans didn't do as well as we expected them to was, for some reason, Republicans failed to close the deal. But that doesn't mean that there isn't enormous frustration out there. There is enormous frustration out there. I see it every day. You go out in the rest of the country, outside of D.C., outside of Washington, the frustration is real. It's palpable. And for some reason, that didn't come out in this election. It's going to come out. The next time it has to come out, 2024. And I predict it will come out in 2024.
All right, panel, thank you. Great to see all of you tonight.
Hey, Sean Hannity here. Hey, click here to subscribe to Fox News YouTube page and catch our hottest interviews and most compelling analysis. You will not get it anywhere else.